Thank you, ministers and organizers of this transatlantic climate conference. Thank you for the initiative for the conference. During the last few years, so many scientists and politicians from influential institutions and countries have visited Greenland to see the effects on the Arctic environment of the climate changes. The glaciers are melting away, the sea ice is rapidly increasing, the polar bear might be soon listed as an endangered species. The nature is changing, and a lot of money is spent on monitoring the changes in the Arctic environment caused by the climate change, by the human activities. When the visitors, after their visits to the Arctic, are asking for funding for more monitoring of the Arctic nature, they are very rarely asking for funding for projects looking at the effects all these changes in the Arctic are having on all the people living and having their daily life in the Arctic. We are actually people living in the Arctic, in the northern hemisphere, and we have to deal with the consequences of the effects on the Arctic environment caused by the climate changes. It's not just a holiday trip for us. We are living in the Arctic our whole life. And many of us have ancestors who have lived in the Arctic through many generations. We have, through centuries, adapted our way of living and our cultures in Arctic conditions. I will actually argue here that all the climate tourists and natural scientists who visit the Arctic can learn much more from their visits than what they just can see on the surface. The Arctic cultures, like the Inuit culture, have adapted to the extreme and constantly changing Arctic environment. And I think some of our cultural mechanisms that have made it possible for the Inuit to survive in the changing Arctic environment might actually be worth learning about for other cultures that have not been forced by a harsh nature to invent the ability constantly to live with a changing climate. We Inuit have traditionally had many sayings on things people can do to change the weather. Like if you want to stop a storm, you must go outside and catch some of the wind in an old skin boat and thus force some of the wind to calm down. Then the rest of the wind will follow the calm wind and will also calm down. But I'm not sure all of us today are fully believers of all the old sayings. But it is actually not so much the saying in itself that is interesting here. What, on the other hand, is interesting is the old Inuit understanding of a relationship between human actions and changes in the environment. I'm not claiming that we Inuit have predicted the climate changes we are experiencing these years. I'm just saying that Inuit for centuries have had a notion of an interrelationship between human activity and the way the nature and climate acts. On one hand, environmental changes are impacting the human activities. And on the other hand, human activities are impacting the environment. On a practical level, today we may not use much of the specific sayings in traditional Inuit knowledge about changes in nature and weather. But it nevertheless conveys a magnificent cultural gift to us today, namely the fact that we through generation have accepted the concept of a close relationship between human activity and the way the nature is acting. And we have lived accordingly. And this includes the knowledge that we as human beings do not, in all cases, have control over the mood of the wind, the weather, or the climate. It makes us humble in a proactive and a dynamic way. Being socialized into this way of thinking and equipped with that kind of attitude to changes in the nature, it makes easier for us to accommodate to the changes and to act accordingly. We have for generations, through our adaptation to the variations in the Arctic, learned to live with these kind of changes. The seasonal changes have made us aware of differences in resource abundance between summers and winters. The yearly variations have made us choose between different preferred places for summer camps and wintering places, and variations through decades and centuries have made us mobile relating to the changes in resource patterns. What we are experiencing these years might not suit all of us in Greenland too well. For sure, the Inuit hunters in northern parts of Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Russia are not happy with the fact that the sea ice is getting unreliable. These hunters can no longer go hunting during the winter the way they have been doing for generations. They will have to accommodate to the changes in their way of living. And such changes are not always easy to accept. But, and this is my point, through our cultural heritage and our socialization, we have been brought up with the mental tools that help us inventing these necessary changes in our way of living. While reduction of the ice cover may have negative impact on some hunting activities, it may open up new opportunities for other activities in our society, like fisheries. A new generation of hunters and fishermen, building on their ancestors' skills, knowledge, and cultural socialization, adds to this by learning how to cope with the changes. In a way, we look at the climate changes, we have a saying that nothing is so bad that it is not good for something else.